Welcome to the Garde Arts Center in New London, Connecticut. This is the second congressional district debate between Congressman Joe Courtney and congressional candidate Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh. It's being presented by WNPR, CPTV, and The Day. I'm John Dankosky from WNPR's Where We Live. Joining me in asking questions today are Paul Chouanier of The Day and Harriet Jones of WNPR. Tonight's debate is a cumulative time debate, which means that each candidate will have about 22 minutes of time each to answer questions. I'll be guiding the debate to make sure we get to many topics and also to make sure we get answers to the questions that my colleagues ask. There are no breaks in this hour-long event. Each candidate will have an opportunity for closing statements. I will ask the crowd here at the Garde to refrain from clapping, yelling, or other outbursts during the debate. We will have plenty of time to applaud at the end of the debate. We're going to start tonight with a question by Harriet Jones to Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh. Harriet?
This region lags the state, which in turn lags the nation in terms of economic recovery and job creation. In fact, there are parts of New London County that have never really come out of recession. If you were elected to Congress, can you describe the positive steps you would take to ensure that people in your district could find a job?
I appreciate that question, and that's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. I am a businesswoman. I've actually built 2 businesses from scratch in my lifetime, and one of those businesses is a real estate brokerage company, which I own at this time. And the 2nd District is devastated. It has not recovered from the housing collapse. I call it a depression. We have record foreclosures in 2013, record foreclosures. And for the past 8 years that my opponent has been in Congress, I have watched my clients lose their homes, lose their businesses, lose their jobs, lose their health care, and it has to change. So in going down to DC, I believe we need business-minded folks down in Washington instead of, excuse me, but law writers that will add to our bureaucracy, that will add to our regulations, that will add to our taxes, that are burdening. They're oppressive regulations. They are regressive taxes. I would like to see tax reform in Washington, D.C. That will help businesses. That will create jobs. We have to get the government out of the way in order to free up the economy and create jobs once again in southeastern Connecticut and the 64 towns throughout the district.
Congressman Courtney?
Sure. Well, first of all, Harriet, I would encourage you to go to a website, mydistrictdata.com, which actually breaks down by congressional districts unemployment rates from a year ago, 2 years ago, this year, and today. And in fact, you will see that in the 2nd congressional district, the unemployment rate is actually lower than all the contiguous congressional districts that surround it. I don't say that as a way of celebrating, but the fact of the matter is the notion that we're in some sort of death spiral in eastern Connecticut, I think is really overblown. And the New London Day just a few days ago reported that the 3rd quarter of this year had the highest number of home sales in the last 8 years, since 2006. Again, there's a lot of short sales out there. There's a lot of foreclosed properties that are keeping that median price down too low. But the fact of the matter is there's movement. There's activity that's going on right now. And as a member of Congress, when I came in, Electric Boat had lost 1,400 jobs in the 3 years preceding my term in office. And John Casey, the CEO, had issued a statement saying that if we didn't get production levels up to a higher level, there was going to be an additional 2,000 layoffs. In addition, there was no design work at EB for the first time in 50 years on any new class of submarines. And over the last 8 years, sitting on the Sea Power Committee, which is ground zero for the shipbuilding plan authorization, we were able to boost that level of Virginia-class submarine production. And frankly, there have been ups and downs with both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, which that subcommittee, which gets the first crack at the budget authorization process, we rebuffed those attempts and have maintained that build rate. And as far as design work goes, we now have the Ohio class program going in full swing. I checked this morning's website, 366 new jobs openings today as we're standing here at EB. We have worked hard in terms of getting finally the rail line from New London all the way up to the border of Massachusetts. I was with Peg Curtin the other day. She said they were talking about that on the New London City Council 20 years ago. It's going to allow the Port of New London to actually fully unload freight and fill up freight cars, which has not been the case because it's so decrepit. Dredging in Westbrook and Clinton to unlock those marinas. Again, they had a great summer of activity up there and helped Warren Mills, which was basically dead, reopen. And the seller of that transaction credited our office as being instrumental in terms of getting that factory reopened. And again, the looms are running up in that facility. Stores Center, again, intermodal project. Anyone who's driven through the center of Yukon, it has been transformed. It's like Blueback Square in the center of stores. And the fact is that we've got more work to do, but I have a proven track record of rolling my sleeves up and being very focused on real concrete projects of infrastructure and education investments that are going to boost growth in this region.
Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh, would you like to respond quickly?
Absolutely. I would like to thank the hardworking tradesmen at Electric Boat and the company for shaving $800 million off the price of every submarine in order to win the Navy contract. And I do appreciate that Mr. Courtney has worked in Washington, D.C. to protect jobs at Electric Boat, as any congressman would do that represents southeastern Connecticut. However, you cannot be a one-trick pony. And unfortunately, the jobs created at the mill, the 35 jobs, cost taxpayers $500,000. That was a grant. Well, you know, really the taxpayer deserves the credit because it's coming out of your pocket to go into a special interest. 35 jobs is wonderful, but the government needs to get out of job creation. The government has to allow, through deregulation and repealing oppressive taxation, the ability for small businesses to create the jobs. It shouldn't come from a politician. It should come from an innovative entrepreneurs, the way it always has in our country. But we've turned into a country of corporate welfare that politicians use in order to buy votes, and that's hurting the middle class. During Courtney's administration, the middle class has shrunk into poverty, and basically there are no ladders of opportunity. So we may have, fortunately, jobs at Electric Boat. We still aren't building the number of subs that the Navy needs, and I would like to go down to D.C., and I believe as a Republican Congresswoman, I would be representing the majority in Congress, and I will do a much better job for all people in the 2nd District to create jobs, not just for one business entity.
Congressman Courtney, maybe just a brief response if you'd like, because we want to move on to some other things.
I mean, to characterize EB as a pony, it's a pretty big pony. There are 12,000 people working in Groton and Quonset Point. There are over 160 small businesses that feed in the supply chain. We had a conference right over at Avery Point with over 300 companies there about new opportunities to help them grow their business. We had an aeronautics gathering over at Mystic Marriott a few weeks ago. Again, there's going to be a huge increase in aerospace, which again, we've got companies here in Eastern Connecticut, Alpha Q, Westminster Tool, Aerocision in Chester, who are participating at that event there. And it wasn't government handing out largesse, it was connecting people, which we've done with trade missions to promote tourism in this region. And we've got folks from other parts of the world that are bringing groups into this region. We've got to get our game up in terms of tourism because, frankly, we're going to end up like Atlantic City if we don't recognize that we've got to widen the circle of who comes into this region. And my office has been directly involved in making those connections.
I'd like to get the next question, and it's from Paul Chouanier to Congressman Courtney.
Following up on Electric Boat, the Pentagon planning calls for 12 new ballistic missile submarines to replace the Ohio-class Trident submarines. Kind of a two-part question. One, is that justified given the Cold War is long over and the Tridents were originally a Cold War machine? And two, with that $50 billion to $60 billion price tag, how can the nation afford it without busting the defense budget?
Sure. So, as you know, recently the New START treaty was signed between the U.S. and the Russian government, which again brought down the number of warheads to a new lower level. If you look at the plan in terms of how the U.S. military intends to implement that, I mean, the fact is that the sea-based deterrent leg of the triad is going to basically be about 2/3 to 3/4 of the system that's going to operate in the wake of the New START treaty. So yeah, we're not in the midst of, the 60s and 70s in terms of a Cold War, but frankly, there are still folks out there with nuclear weapons, and there's no question that a sea-based deterrent system is the one that's the most effective. It's the most undetectable. Every national security review from Bob Gates to Panetta to Hagel have consistently identified the sea-based system as necessary and at the absolute peak in terms of priorities for this country. Admiral Greenert was in Groton the other day reiterating that point. So again, I think we certainly can justify from not just a parochial level, but a national level about the priority of this program. How you're going to afford it, again, back in the 50s when we had a similar challenge, a separate fund was set up, the 41 for Freedom Fund, and on the Sea Power Subcommittee this year, we set up a similar mechanism, a national sea-based deterrence fund, which is going to take it out of the shipbuilding account and allow basically the Navy to continue with its other programs like Virginia and surface ships without being suffocated by the high cost of this program. We did it as a nation back in the 50s and 60s, and we can do it again. And it is the Sea Power Committee that led the way, and I was part of the group, the bipartisan group, that designed that amendment so that we're going to have actually a sustainable budget to meet this critical national security need.
Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh?
I have no response to that question. I would like to get back to jobs and opportunities for people throughout the 2nd District, the 64 towns in the 2nd District. And if you take military and put it aside, there are no jobs in the 2nd District. The casinos that Mr. Courtney mentioned are shedding jobs. They had record double-digit losses in August. And really, the train tracks that are being rebuilt and the $10 million grant that Mr. Courtney brought back to Connecticut is greatly appreciated. However, we have the Interstate 395 corridor, one of the most outstanding opportunities in the entire state for industrial expansion and for industry development. Green industry, if it so chooses it to be the innovative processes that we need here, but we need jobs, we need businesses. And I was actually fortunate to meet with a couple of the manufacturing companies that attended Mr. Courtney's photo op opportunity when he met with the different companies that he just discussed. And they, not only did I follow in Mr. Courtney's footsteps and tour their facility, I spoke to every one of their working, poor, middle-class workers, every single one of them, and heard their stories. And what I heard was that they don't have food in their refrigerators because they can't afford to live in Connecticut. It doesn't pay enough. People are hurting. Whatever happens at Electric Boat is a blessing. We're so fortunate, but we lost thousands of jobs. Joe Courtney can't take credit for Electric Boat and not take responsibility for losing Pfizer. Thousands of high-paying jobs that left the state of Connecticut. And I don't blame him for everything. I don't. But he hasn't helped the middle class. He hasn't helped the working poor. And our ladders of opportunity are destroyed by the policies in Washington, D.C. that he has voted for. He votes 95% of the time with Nancy Pelosi and President Obama. We are a district that is 60% non-Democrat. And unfortunately, he votes 100% of the time, if not a couple of times where he decides to come across the aisle, for a policy, for the issues, for the problems that we look at today as a country that have been created by poor leadership in Washington, D.C.
Hey, and Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh, we just about caught up on time. Very quickly, could you just maybe give us a few seconds on the importance of the submarine fleet to meet the current military threats the U.S. faces?
Absolutely. We do not have the subbase right now, unfortunately. Mr. Courtney has said that the subbase is secure because there's been an investment into the infrastructure of the subbase. In August, the Rear Admiral's position was eliminated, and 5 subs have left Groton to go down south. With Electric Boat, there are not enough subs at this time for a war situation where the Navy would like to have the subs that can be at sea for a specific duration, so we do need more subs. I'm sure that if Mr. Courtney is reelected, he will work for Electric Boat, as I will as well.
The next
Excuse me,
question,
John, can I just point out,
if
okay,
you'd like,
I mean, she
quickly, if
just
you
said
would.
that 5 subs left the base, and she's been saying it on the radio. Okay, the flag position, subgroup 2, was eliminated, along with 25 other billets throughout the Navy as part of Secretary Gates' cost-cutting measures. And it is true that there were 5 submarines that were assigned to Admiral Perry's billet. However, as the New London Day repeatedly reported, and all you have to do is pick up the phone call and call Captain Lottie, the fact is those subs were reassigned to squadrons right here in Groton, Connecticut. So there were 16 subs the day before Admiral Perry's billet was eliminated, and there are 16 subs there today. And if you look at the laydown that the Navy has put out through 2020, the fact is we are going to maintain every single one of those subs that exist there today, as opposed to Norfolk, Virginia, which is going down to 5 submarines. So the notion that we lost 5 subs to Virginia is either willful or just really reckless negligence on her part to not take the time to pick up the phone and talk to the people at the base about an issue that's this critical and that has been repeatedly reported on in the New London Day.
I'd like to move on to the next question. Paul Chenier has a question for Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh.
I want to turn to your concern about federal intrusion at the local level. And looking at your website, you wrote that, quote, you oppose social engineering of our society and changes to the Civil Rights Act that forces equal outcomes through social injustice. Local control of land use and real property rights are sacred and non-negotiable. Liberties are in imminent danger by federal abuse of power, close quote. And I was just wondering, why do you feel federal authorities are endangering our local property rights? And if so, what would you do to address the situation if elected?
Well, if you take a look at Connecticut and being in the city of New London and having gone through what the egregious violation of real property rights at Fort Trumbull, over $100 million of taxpayer money was pocketed in order to level a peninsula in New London and take away people's real property rights, businesses and homeowners. They were basically violated in a manner that is totally un-American. And I believe Mr. Courtney, one of his first bills when he went to Congress had to do with protecting certain areas of our state, including Salem, Connecticut. And when he wrote the bill, he actually wrote eminent domain into the bill. And if it wasn't for the Republicans in Washington, D.C. that said that we won't accept eminent domain condemnation in any bill where the federal government gets to control the decision of condemning land on a local level. Right now we have in Washington, D.C. as well, we have the Department of Environmental Protection, which is redefining water rights in our country. We are a country of property owners. When that is taken away, we're a different country. I would like to make sure that those rights are protected. I will never accept Fort Trumbull happening as long as I can fight it. That's one of the reasons I got involved in politics, was because of the egregious violations to Fort Trumbull. And that was a bipartisan situation as well. And Connecticut is still one state that does not protect property rights, in my mind, to the extent that needs to be protected. I will not accept the federal government from taking any more redefining rights when it comes to assets or local property.
Congressman?
Sure. Well, I appreciate her bringing up the 8 Mile River Wild and Scenic Bill, which actually is one of my proudest accomplishments as a member of Congress. And I would just say that, for people who maybe don't follow, the gradations of different national park programs, wild and scenic status is not a taking. That language of the bill was not changed by one syllable. My predecessor, Rob Simmons, to his credit, actually did some of the preliminary work in terms of that measure. But the bill that was drafted and that was debated over 2 days in Washington and passed with a bipartisan majority, and by the way, had bipartisan support from First Selectmen all up and down the 8 Mile River towns that were contiguous to it, to set up a framework to protect this treasure in southeastern Connecticut. So again, there were claims made that it was a taking and that, there was going to be the black helicopters and all the stuff that you hear out there. The Wild and Scenic program is a very non-intrusive way of trying to get buy-in and collaboration from landowners and from local communities to protect precious natural assets, and it's working like a charm. In fact, I think there's an event this Saturday to celebrate the enactment of that legislation, which I think is one of the great achievements of this region. And again, the people from that area, and including my predecessor, deserve as much credit as I do for enactment of that legislation.
What do you think the limits of eminent domain should be?
Again, I think if you look historically, it's for, urgent public needs, such as, for military purposes, for, again, infrastructure that is essential to make communities run. That's always been the traditional rule, and it's a question of law, which, judges and courts and law students, have debated for years and years and years. But again, generally speaking, it's a very high standard.
And do you think that Fort Trumbull met that standard?
Again, but just for the record, I wasn't in Congress when that was all going on. I, was back up in Vernon in those days, so I was not as close to it as Lori was and maybe some of the other people here in the audience were. Again, I think that the notion that economic development, to me, that's getting too close to the line and possibly went over the line in that instance. But you know, for the folks in the city of New London who have such a small strip of property, trying to come up with a plan for economic development and create a property tax base, it's a terrible challenge. And you know, I think on balance, it probably went too far against the homeowners.
Can I just ask you for a brief response?
I am surprised that Mr. Courtney does not understand the Supreme Court decision, Kelo versus the City of New London, which redefined eminent domain to allow it for private gain, corporate special interest gain. As an attorney, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a specialist in law. However, I do read the law, and I do know how to read bills and laws and look out for our rights. And there's nothing reckless, Mr. Courtney, about looking out for rights. There's nothing crazy about wanting to make sure that our Constitution is protected.
Let's go to the next question, and it's Harriet Jones, and it's for Congressman Courtney.
We're about a year into the full implementation of the Affordable Care Act, and it's raised lots of unforeseen circumstances. People who thought that their coverage, they wouldn't have to change their coverage, have had to change their coverage. There's been a big growth in Medicaid, which has raised questions about a dependency culture. There's even been questions about maybe this is the end of employer-sponsored healthcare coverage. Is this a bigger revolution than perhaps the American people signed up for?
Well, I would just say this. In the state of Connecticut, where there was a target of 100,000 folks to be enrolled, we are at 256,000. I was over at the public library in New London, Groton. I went up to the enrollment fairs in Vernon and Enfield and saw, you know, the foot traffic of people who were going in there because they hadn't, in many instances, had health insurance in years. I talked to Tony DePace up in Enfield, Connecticut, who's an auto mechanic, who's saving $1,200 a month because of a qualified health plan through Blue Cross that he got through the plan. Tony Basilica here in town saved $18,000 last year because he's a diabetic, and he doesn't mind me telling anybody that, because he got an affordable premium as opposed to the pre-ACA healthcare plan that he had that was $2,600 a month with a $5,000 deductible. John DeVivo, who's the HR director for Willimantic Waste, which is the second largest private employer up in Wyndham, got an email from him the other day, and he was thrilled. His rates went down in 2015, and the reason is because there's more competition in Connecticut. Harvard Pilgrim is now selling product in the state. Oxford United Health Plan is now reached out to other markets. So this notion that we were somehow, restricting private health insurance markets, I mean, in fact, the opposite is happening. We have more people coming into the state to sell health insurance, which is a good thing in terms of creating real competition for consumers and small businesses. This bill is not the 10 Commandments, okay? I mean, any measure can be amended and changed. And I was glad to see Susan Collins a couple days ago saying that the Republicans should just sort of move on and get to work in terms of making fixes to the legislation. The cliff in terms of part-time, full-time, it needs work. There's no question about it. The folks at Willimantic Waste, though, because the rates came in so low, they just said, we're going to take care of everybody. But the fact is, it's real, and it's a problem that should be fixed. And I, frankly, have, along with many other people, good ideas about smoothing that cliff out so that you don't create the improper disincentive. And as far as people on Medicaid, again, I was with a friend of mine who's manicurist, is self-employed up in Coventry. She's low income, but she loves to do what she's doing, and she got a Medicaid plan. I don't think she's dependent at all. She's out there working hard and pursuing her dream. And her daughter had a health problem this year, and thank God for the family that they had coverage, which they hadn't had for years before they had that new opportunity.
Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh?
Well, I believe that Obamacare is a reckless law, to use the term reckless that my opponent uses, and it was passed on a prescription of lies. I believe that the healthcare professionals in Connecticut that are losing their jobs at Day Kimball, Bacchus, and L&M would beg to differ on how this bill turned into law without anyone reading it has affected them, including my husband who lost his job at Lawrence Memorial Hospital due to cuts in the state of Connecticut. So people are hurting because of Obamacare, and businesses across the 2nd District, Courtney's district right now, are cutting their workforce hours. People have less money because of Obamacare, and they have less health care coverage. So people are losing their doctors, they have lost their health insurance policies and their money. Yes, we have to ensure coverage of pre-existing conditions. Absolutely, we have to ensure coverage of pre-existing conditions. We have to ensure that the poor and the sick are well cared for. That's our obligation morally as a society. But we did not need the government intervention into our privacy and choice. We did not need the government to take over 1/6 of our economy. We did not need a law that penalizes people for not participating in a health care program. And no, Nancy Pelosi, Mr. Courtney, and all of the people who are opted out of Obamacare, that is, they're keeping their Cadillac plans. But I'm one of those folks in the 2nd District that is suffering. My family, I can speak on behalf of all of us that are suffering. You know, you criticize Republicans, Mr. Courtney, for being hysterical because the exchange rollout was so botched and just a horrific experience for so many people. I have a client who actually has cancer, and she was unable to even have her prescriptions filled for more than 7 days because the pharmacies didn't know what they were doing. This was the worst rollout of any program ever in the history of the United States, and Joe Courtney voted for it. And we have right now a growing workforce of part-timers. So when we talk about job creation, we're not talking about well-paying full-time career jobs like the jobs that I will bring you if I'm sent to DC. We're talking about part-timers who are struggling to find a decent job and put food on their tables. Worse yet, we're covering millions of welfare recipients with no accountability or transparency. We still don't have a health care program that works in the federal government. And really, the worst part about this is the senior citizens. The Medicare costs, right now we have, and I have Mariella Hopkins, by the way, she's my mom. She's 87 years old, and her supplemental insurance went from $625 in 2009, and she's paying $2,025 in 2014. And she doesn't make any more money, and she cannot afford the increases because of Obamacare. Premium costs have increased, and right now we have deductibles that are so high for affordable health care that people aren't going to the doctors. Mr. Courtney has not looked out for the middle class, hasn't looked out for the working poor, and Obamacare should be repealed and replaced with something that ensures our privacy and gives us an affordable, high-quality health care program in this country.
Can I ask you quickly to just say what exactly you would replace it with? What pieces of Obamacare do you need to take away, and what would you replace it with?
Well, I believe that we have not. First of all, I do not believe that we needed 16,000 IRS agents, and I don't believe it's a tax. Okay, that's a problem.
Yeah, but let me know what you would replace. What plan would you put in place of Obamacare?
I would like to see greater choice for people. Even poor people should have greater choice. I do not want to see us go towards a one-payer system like the VA. We've already had the VA scandal. Mr. Courtney stood by for 8 years, and these scandals have been happening in the VA for 8 years with the health care, and nothing was said about it because it protects special interests. Our military is not getting, they don't get the services they deserve in the VA. They need choices and options. No one should have to go from Groton to New Haven in order to see a doctor. We need choice in healthcare where people are given the opportunity to decide where they want to spend the money.
Congressman?
So for 4 years, that question has been asked over and over and over again, and not once in either the Senate or the House has the Republican leadership come forward with a repeal and replace program. It has just been this complete sort of obstructionist. We refuse to even touch any kind of modifications or changes to the law, and we just saw it here, again here this evening. I mean, you know, you can talk about you don't want to see pre-existing conditions, but you've got to restructure the market to actually do that. We had a high-risk pool in the state of Connecticut going back to the 1970s. It cost $30,000 a year to get health insurance for somebody with a pre-existing condition, which is why there was virtually nobody enrolled in that plan. So that now guys like Tony that I talked about with diabetes can actually get an affordable plan with a $2,000 deductible, far lower than what he had before he had an ACA plan, or Tony DePace, whose kid had a football injury, and he was able to get an affordable plan for him and his family. Again, real quick, seniors, we've closed the donut hole. I stood on this stage in 2006 and promised the seniors who had this outrageous donut hole put into the Part D prescription drug plan that when I go to Congress, I'm going to work to close it. And the ACA did it. It's 60% closed. Over the next 2 or 3 years, it'll be 100% closed. Families can keep their kids on till age 26, which has added millions to the insured. But again, Gallup did a study in the state of Connecticut in terms of the insured. We cut the rate of uninsured in this state in half in year one. And our exchange, and Nancy Wyman, my friend from Tallinn, deserves immense credit for the fact that they put together a team that came up with a workable website, which is why our numbers shattered all of the projections that was given to the state of Connecticut.
And I'm just going to break in just because we're roughly equal on time, and we've got a lot more that we wanted to get to. Harry Jones has the next question, and it's for Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh.
You have used, in other forums than this, you have used the word fascism to describe democratic policies, and you've called President Obama a racist. Unfortunately, we live in times where we've seen the terrible results of real extremism in other parts of the globe. Why do you feel it's appropriate to use those kinds of terms in a U.S. congressional race?
Well, I believe that freedom of speech is very important. And one thing that I found in running for Congress is that there are certain forces at work in the media and in the Democratic Party that would like to see speech silenced. And I refuse to silence my speech. I will stand for the Constitution. And one of the issues that is happening right now in the federal government is the use of disparate impact or disparate impact as an argument for redistributing our societies into different communities. We are mapped, that's a fact, and I sent Mr. Chouanier all of the statistics and facts to back up every word I've ever said. Now, the term fascist, my mother came to America from Italy when she was 18 years old. She escaped war, fascism, and poverty to come to the shores here for freedom and liberty. Unfortunately, the term fascism is placing race over nation. Our country is a country of liberty. No race should be placed over nation. We have a justice system that should be blind, but it's no longer blind. And we have an administration that wants social justice in a way we've never seen before. And that I am opposed to. I believe that all Americans, regardless of skin color, should be protected under the Constitution and under law. The term that you're referring to was a speech that I made specifically defining the word and using it appropriately in a sentence. Yet we're not allowed to speak anymore in the United States. We are shamed. We are told not to talk about the laws and policies that are being implemented in Washington, D.C. And I will make sure that as your Congresswoman, I will let you know what's happening. It won't be done in the dark of night or behind closed doors or through departments that circumvent Congress. It will be done under law.
Congressman Courtney, would you like to respond?
I am asked all the time about why is Washington so gridlocked and so polarized. And I think, one of the problems is that there's, in my opinion, irresponsible tendency to try and demonize people using terms like fascist and racist, which really, I think, totally kind of locks up the ability of people to sit down and act as this country has over 200 years in terms of having vigorous debate, having strong principled positions with a full freedom of speech, but at the end of the day, being able to recognize that we are all Americans and that we're all not, the other guy isn't goose-stepping around Washington, D.C. Because you don't agree with his position or her position. And so, I would just say to anyone listening to this debate here tonight who is frustrated with Washington and looks at somebody like myself who, we have an ad running about the student loan bill, which, believe me, is not the panacea of higher education. But what is significant in that ad is that I'm standing next to a Republican chairman of the Education Committee and Angus King, an independent from the state of Maine, and that we were able as a group to come together and get a result and actually get a bill passed that avoided a doubling of the interest rates for the Stafford Student Loan Program. That's what people are really looking for. They really are not looking for people to go down to Congress and see who can say something more outrageous than the other person, because that's what really degrades and locks up the ability of this country to move forward.
And I'm just wondering, Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh, very quickly, because we do want to move on. You talked about placing race over nation. What specifically do you mean by that?
Well, right now, if you take a look at there are specific reports out there. In the state of Connecticut, there's a company, a nonprofit organization, Hartford, by the name of the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. And they have and everyone here, I ask you please to visit their website and print out the 2013 report that they have on their website that actually shows the mapping according to skin color. And I believe that we need to be colorblind. I believe that there is no, skin color divides us. Mr. Courtney wants to talk about going down to Washington, D.C. and really working across the aisle and working together as Americans. Well, you know what? We come in all colors. Americans come in all shades. And really, this administration is taking race to a level we've never seen before. And I'm not going to not say that. I'm going to tell the truth. I will always tell the truth. That's what people want in Washington, D.C. They want candidates that are going to back up their words with actions when they get down there. I want freedom for all of us.
Paul Schwanier, you have the next question. It's for Congressman Courtney.
Representative Courtney, should the president restrict air travel to the United States in light of the Ebola epidemic in West Africa, at least until the CDC has a better handle on the situation?
Sure. So again, just to sort of lay out a little bit of the timeline, you know, when we voted to keep the government open with a temporary budget till December 11th, it was not a straight line continuation. We actually added funds for CDC's budget as well as the NIH's budget, because there was a recognition that, you know, we need to concentrate more resources in terms of addressing this problem. The entry screening program, which CDC unveiled 2 days ago, which is going to basically take people from those 3 countries, Liberia, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, Guinea and Sierra Leone, at JFK and the other airports, all of them off to the side to have a medical testing, is, in my opinion, a good layered response that will, in fact, work. And I say that because that's exactly what the government of Nigeria has done over the last 3 or 4 months. And in fact, they have been able to contain Ebola, where there was a small or a somewhat scary outbreak earlier this year. They used exactly that same system without trying to come up with a way of having a flight ban or travel ban. I mean, today we have about 150 epidemiologists from the state of Connecticut, from the United States, that's over there, concentrating resources in terms of trying to root out the Ebola virus, which is how we dealt with SARS and we have dealt with H1N1. I mean, that's how you stop this, which is you go to the source and you eradicate it. And you use, obviously, common sense measures to protect this country. My wife is a nurse practitioner who works at St. Francis Hospital, a population which is probably as, you know, sort of has much at stake as almost any group. So I care deeply about the fact that we have good systems in this country, particularly for our healthcare workers, to make sure that they can deal with this. And we have shown in Atlanta and Omaha that we actually treated 5 who came into this country with Ebola, and they recovered. So there are systems to do it. We need to do more. And you know, hospitals, tertiary hospitals, frankly, and lower level hospitals need to have a system so that we get folks, if there is any of those cases, help as much as they need. And that's what that CDC funding, which I voted for, is designed to do.
Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh?
Well, I believe that better safe than sorry, and I think that the CDC has demonstrated that they really don't have a grasp on this Ebola outbreak, because if they did, we wouldn't have a nurse that is under quarantine now with Ebola that treated unfortunately, the deceased patient in the hospital, and we are seeing more Ebola outbreak. I do believe that it would be wise to ensure that no flights coming in, indirect or direct, like other countries, Canada, there are several countries, France, that have blocked flights. I believe that would be the appropriate measure to keep us safe here, and I think that We don't have the vaccine readily available to treat people, so more people will die. We need to treat it. I agree with Congressman Courtney that we need to treat it at its location in West Africa. However, we are not taking the right precautions here in the United States. People will come on those planes with no symptoms, and lo and behold, they have Ebola.
Would you, if you were elected to Congress, would you vote for more funding for the CDC?
It depends on how it's used. As long as it's accountable, yes, I would. I think that keeping our country safe is one of the main priorities for the government, for the federal government. So using our funds in those ways is a smart use of funds.
I want to go to the next question, if I could. It's Paul Chouanier again, and this is to Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh. I will tell the candidates that we may have about 4 extra minutes than we've budgeted for at the end, and we'll parcel those out near the end of the debate. But Paul, please.
The Obama administration has undertaken an effort using air support and trying to get our allies on the ground to stop the spread of the Islamic State in the Middle East, Iraq, and Syria. If that does not prove adequate, and the Obama administration, based on the advice of the generals, decide that we need ground troops in the Middle East to stop the Islamic State, would you authorize that escalation of military help?
I actually don't think that there's a choice at this point, which is so sad to say. The foreign policy of this country is such a mess. Obama has done a terrible job. He has not handled Iraq or Syria appropriately. And what we see right now, more money going to Palestine to rebuild Palestine. We see more money going over to the Middle East, and that money, unfortunately, is not being used to build schools and hospitals. That money is being used to build tunnels and buy weapons. We have a major problem in Iraq and Syria, but it's not just Iraq and Syria. This is a global jihadist problem, and we don't have a foreign policy that is going to address that problem. We see it in England right now, Holland, all across the globe, the jihadists and their ability to wreak terror on civilized society. I do not believe that Obama has done the right things for our country, pulling out of Iraq, indecisive in Syria, and I wish there was nothing more in the world that I wish that our men and women were here at home. And there's nothing more than I want for our country not to be at war. Unfortunately, if we allow ISIL, and the president uses ISIL, not ISIS, because this is a regional concept of forming a caliphate. Once the caliphate is formed throughout that region, there is no turning back from that. And that caliphate that is run by jihadists and Sharia law is a threat to our country. Our national security is threatened today more than ever before. And unfortunately, Congressman Courtney votes lockstep with the Democrats 96% of the time and cuts our military budget when the world is a more dangerous place today.
Congressman?
Sure. So Secretary Bob Gates, when he was leaving office, gave a speech at West Point Academy where he said that any Secretary of State who recommends to a president another ground invasion into the Middle East ought to have their head examined. And I agree with him. I think that having a ground invasion into the Middle East, again, would, in my opinion, be totally counterproductive. I think it's exactly what ISIS wants, actually, is to suck us in to that region of the world with a ground invasion. And that's why I voted, only one from Connecticut, for the Title X authorization in September that allows us to train indigenous forces outside of Syria to take the fight because it's their neighborhood. The wolf is at their door. It's really not at our door right now. And it's a proposal which had strong bipartisan support to get that passed. If you look at since August 8th when the airstrike started in Iraq again, the ISIS was on the gates of Erbil in the Kurdish section of the northern Iraq. They have been pushed back. They have been pushed back away from Mosul Dam. The tribes were rescued. There's still some very difficult fighting that's going on there right now, but the fact of the matter is the momentum of ISIS has been stalled by and large, certainly in the northern part where you had actually ground forces in the form of the Peshmerga and the Kurds who were willing to actually fight for their own people and their families. And that's really what the Title X authorization is about giving people the capacity to fight for their own communities, their own nation state, and fight back against the forces of ISIL. I would say, that we now have regional partners, Middle East nations that are flying airstrikes in Arab territory, almost unheard of in world history. We have our allies in Europe that are joining us in the fight. So the fact of the matter is that there has been very strong positive movement in terms of building a coalition to push back against a group that is very much a threat to stability, certainly in the Middle East, and ultimately outside of the Middle East if they're not contained.
Congressman, I'm wondering, one of the things that Ms. Hopkins-Cavanagh suggested is that the Obama administration has mishandled the situation. The president has even suggested that indeed he and his administration were surprised a bit by the quick rise of ISIS or ISIL as the Islamic State. Do you agree?
Well, if you read closely, what he said is he was surprised by the fact that the Iraqi army folded as quickly as they did. And I would suggest that anyone here read Secretary Gates's book in terms of that what happened at the time that the drawdown of the troops occurred. Again, the status of forces agreement drawing down our troops, our combat troops, was negotiated by the Bush administration. Gates lays that out in absolute black and white. The attempt by the Obama administration to keep a residuary force in 2010 and 2011 was completely rebuffed by the Maliki government, said he wouldn't even bring it up for a vote in the Iraqi parliament. So unless people were expecting the U.S. to go in and allow troops to be there without immunizing them from being prosecuted in Iraqi courts, because that's exactly what the issue was before the House Armed Services Committee when this issue was being debated. The fact is that the die was cast with the SOFA agreement that was negotiated in 2008 before the Bush administration left office.
Do you have a quick response?
I don't think anyone's buying that, unfortunately. I think that what we have right now is a complete foreign policy disaster in the Middle East that was caused by lack of leadership. And I think we have lost a lot of American blood in the Middle East because of our determination for all, maybe the right reasons, maybe the wrong reasons. I'm not going to point fingers. Mr. Courtney would love to point fingers at Republicans, and Mr. Courtney would like to blame other people. We've seen that for the last 8 years with President Obama. Enough is enough. I have not served in Washington, D.C. I'm not privileged to the military information that Mr. Courtney is privileged to. But I have common sense, and I can see ISIL forming their desire to form a caliphate. And I can also see Pakistan lobbing missiles over to India right now. And I can see a lot of problems throughout our country that our country failing to address jihadism. And for the past 8 years, or 6 years rather, we have seen a foreign policy that refuses to identify the enemy. Jihad is our enemy, and we need to stand resolutely, strongly against it and work with other countries to achieve those goals. But we don't have a foreign policy solution at this time.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions, and Harriet Jones has the next question, and it's for the Congressman.
We live in times still of very moderate economic growth, and many people are deeply concerned about the indebtedness of the U.S. government. Is your prescription to double down on investment in infrastructure and spend more taxpayer dollars that way, or would it be to lower spending and focus more on the deficit? What do you think your constituents would want you to do?
Certainly, I think they want both. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the reduction of deficits from just 2011 when the fiscal cliff bill, or early 2013 when the fiscal cliff bill was passed, we are now down below 3% of GDP as opposed to close to 10% in 2011. So there's been actually very positive movement towards reducing the budget deficit. And I would just say our Treasury paper still is being sold at very low prices, so the world certainly has confidence, and our own people have confidence in terms of buying Treasury bonds about the fiscal solvency long-term of this nation. But we can do better. I've got kids. I want to make sure that they're not carrying an unnecessary burden. Growing the economy is the way to solve that problem. And certainly, as I think saw with the great reaction in Eastern Connecticut to getting that rail line from end users and local communities and chambers of commerce, people get it, that if you invest in infrastructure, you're going to promote growth. And again, go through the center of Yukon, see the Storrs Center in terms of what, again, some actually relatively modest investments in terms of transportation and upgrading the infrastructure, which the developer said was critical to making that progress, that project move forward. It works. And so we need to get a surface transportation bill, a real one, not the 11-month Band-Aid that Speaker Boehner put out there. We need to invest in education. We need to get our workforce ready for advanced manufacturing. That aerospace conference that was down in Mississippi, that was the #1 topic. We need people who are ready to deal with the complexity of modern manufacturing, because there's going to be opportunities out there for them. And that's how I think you grow the middle class and you promote growth in this country.
And Congressman, thank you very much.
I don't think Mr. Courtney knows how to grow the middle class, because the middle class has been decimated by the policies that he has voted for. And several years back, when he was running against Congressman Simmons, he was just outraged by the national debt. He was outraged by the unfunded liabilities, and now we have over double the debt, $17.8 trillion in debt, and even worse, $127 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And Mr. Courtney, unfortunately, will not prioritize spending, and he has kicked that can down the road for the entire time he's been in D.C. The Highway Trust Fund is broke. Many of our funds are broke, and the government has just robbed Peter to pay Paul. It is fiscally irresponsible. He has not done his job as a congressman.
And I think that we have 1 minute for each candidate to answer a final question that Harriet Jones has, and I think we're going to direct that question to Lori Hopkins-Cavanagh.
Do you support the path to citizenship for currently illegal immigrants that's contained within the Senate bill? If that measure came to the House and you're a member of the House, would you support that?
I believe we have to secure our borders, and I believe that we have to change a few things that have created humanitarian crises at our borders. I think we have a problem with trying to blanket amnesty, which my opponent agrees with, which would basically give citizenship to just about everybody who's here, versus a path to citizenship that makes sense for people who have been here, children who are born here, people who have been here that are employed. But we are not protecting our border now. We are not protecting, we had in 2010, 9,000 children come over the border, and due to the policies that my opponent supports, this year we'll have 90,000 children coming across the border. It's irresponsible and it's wrong. And until Congress gets together and decides that we have to come up with a plan, a bipartisan plan that does both, then I will support that plan.
And we have 1 minute,
So
Congressman.
the Senate bill is exactly what she just described. It's a bipartisan plan that people came together. It passed with almost 70 votes in the Senate, and it includes $40 billion in terms of beefing up border enforcement. My nephew Philip is a Border Patrol officer down in Ajo, Arizona, right at ground zero where these issues are there, and it's going to boost in a whole range of personnel and technology to strengthen the border. That it never would have passed in the Senate if it didn't have very robust border enforcement. But what it also does is it responds to the workforce needs of this country, and all you have to do is talk to the Connecticut Farm Bureau or any of the producers in eastern Connecticut who are militantly in favor of the Senate bill, because it creates a system of agricultural labor that's going to allow the cows to get milk and the crops to get picked, which is a real problem for them. And these are, you know, in my opinion, the salt of the earth and rock solid residents of this district. They want that bill to pass, and it's ridiculous that we haven't been able to get even a vote in the House to finish the job.
We're out of time, and you're first with your closing statement. You have 90 seconds.
90 seconds, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you to all the sponsors of the debate and the audience for being here this evening. You know, I think in some respects, this election is really, in this district and certainly around the country, in many respects, is not about necessarily Republicans versus Democrats. It's about people whose approach to the job is focused on getting results and getting a real outcome. And if you look at the time that I've been in Congress, and I mentioned it earlier, I came in a time when EB's workforce was shrinking. I went on the committee where the job had to happen first in terms of sea power, and we have managed to increase the workforce by 20% from early 2007, and there are 366 job openings today for new hires down there, and there's more to come because of the projection of the shipbuilding plan. We need, by the way, to have somebody somebody there on that committee to protect that progress, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running. If the voters allow me to serve again next year, I'm actually in position now to be the top Democrat on the Sea Power Subcommittee, which has never happened in modern history in terms of this district. Important when we have issues like the Ohio Replacement Program, that we need to have people there that can actually protect this region. The rail project, dredging, the intermodal project in Storrs Center, the Warren Mill project. I didn't get to I-395. We got the sewer treatment plant that's going to allow the Putnam Industrial Park to move forward. These are real results all across the district, which I can demonstrate to the people, and I'm going to keep working to make sure the middle class of this part of Connecticut grows.
And thank you, Congressman, please.
Okay, well, I have to say that I'm running for Congress because I see the American dream slipping away. And the American dream was built by middle class and hardworking, working poor. That's where it came from, in innovation and business. And I represented over 600 companies. I understand business in a way that Mr. Courtney obviously doesn't, because since he's been in Congress, there hasn't been one new industry established in Connecticut. And it was interesting that in the New London Day, they had a article on plagiarism. And you know, in writing information about my plans to build businesses on the Interstate 395 corridor and finish Route 11 and do things that will make sense, that are already there, the infrastructure is already there, that will really attract, to cut the regressive regulations and taxes that are killing the middle class and the small businesses. But you know, I have to tell you, with the plagiarism, I had come up with a concept to rebuild shipbuilding in southeastern Connecticut, utilizing our highly skilled workers. And I took that concept from the Mashantucket Pequots, their high-speed vessels. They were jet turbine propelled vessels. And they sold 5 of those vessels globally. And my focus has been on bringing the Export-Import Bank money to support medium-sized businesses and shipbuilding in our region.
Because we've reached the end of the debate, I want to thank both the candidates very much. I want to thank the reporters who asked the questions, the Garde Arts Center, of course, and our audience, both here and at home. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Nice job.
Thank you so much.